Hello and welcome to the Word of the Day podcast, where useful words are pleasantly explained. This show comes to you, as always, pre-recorded from the cozy confines of the RAV4 studios. I'm your host, Jamie Silva, and I'm ready to jump right into today's word. And this word is sophomoric. Now, I understand this adjective to mean intellectually shallow, half-baked, or superficial, usually in regard to ideas or arguments. But I'm not very confident that I got this right, so I will happily seek the aid of the official definition, which is, quote, pretentious or juvenile, unquote. Okay, this is all right, but I'd like to dispense with the juvenile angle, which is more about possessing a fondness for crude and unsophisticated humor. Like, as a genre, sophomoric humor even has its own very short Wikipedia entry. And I guess if this isn't the sort of comedy you like, you're welcome to criticize films or comedians that specialize in it as sophomoric and lowbrow. But I don't think this is the primary usage, and it definitely isn't the usage that I want to focus on. What I'm thinking of is better captured by this Merriam-Webster definition. Quote, conceited and overconfident of knowledge, but poorly informed and immature, unquote. One thing people like to say sometimes is that they know just enough about something to be dangerous. And this saying, in turn, comes from the aphorism, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. So, what explains this dim view of knowing a little bit about something? Isn't this better than nothing? Well, in many cases, sadly, it's way worse. And here's why. Let's say, for example, that I know nothing about juggling chainsaws. Now, if I'm fully aware of my ignorance, I will leave the chainsaws alone. I'm not going to try this. But let's say I know a little bit about juggling chainsaws. Like, I'm already a good juggler with other objects. I've graduated from lemons to bowling pins to butter knives to small logs. And I've even watched some instructional videos on juggling chainsaws, and I have an okay grasp of the proper technique. In a way, this is admirable. I've made some progress. I'm certainly closer to having this ability than the average person. But this skill, this knowledge, might give me the confidence, or rather the overconfidence I need to attempt an incredibly dangerous feat where the risks to being unprepared are quite large. The word sophomoric is sort of like this, but with regard to ideas rather than chainsaws, because it contains this idea that even a little bit of information or knowledge leads people to loudly promulgate firm opinions that only serve to betray their ignorance to the true expert. And you can thus describe those opinions as sophomoric. If there are any sophomores listening, by the way, either in high school or college, you may be wondering if this word might imply anything insulting about you. Sadly, the answer is yes, it definitely does. You see, another meaning of sophomoric is relating to or characteristic of a sophomore. And this is no accident. Why pick on sophomores? Because stereotypically, or at least linguistically, sophomores are full of academic self-regard at having completed an entire year of high school or college, as the case may be. And they're pretty sure they've figured stuff out. And if everyone else would just pipe down real quick and listen to them, they might learn a thing or two. And I want to read to you here the opening lines from the short story Franny and Zoe by the American author J.D. Salinger, which beautifully portrays the attitude that I'm talking about. It goes like this, quote, of the 20-some young men who were waiting at the station for their dates to arrive on the 10:52 train, no more than 6 or 7 were out on the cold open platform. The rest were standing around in hatless, smoky little groups of 2s and 3s and 4s inside the heated waiting room, talking in voices that, almost without exception, sounded collegiately dogmatic, as though each young man, in his strident conversational turn, was clearing up, once and for all, some highly controversial issue, one that the outside, non-matriculating world had been bungling, provocatively or not, for centuries, unquote. And non-matriculating, by the way, just means not enrolled in or not having attended college, unlike these deep thinkers. Now, left unsaid but unquestionably implied here is the idea that the young college-going men at the train station are not as smart as they seem, as they sound, or as they likely think they are. They're not dumb, let's be clear. Presumably, they're bright and studious types. But the problem is that, having only scratched the surface of various highly controversial issues via their studies, they have the gumption, even the arrogance, to speak with authority on them, as if they have learned all there is to know. This is what the word sophomoric is all about, leaping too rapidly from a little knowledge to a lot of certainty. Here's another way to look at sophomoric. If parts of my neighbor's lawn were looking a little brown and patchy, and they asked if I had any ideas for how to fix it, I would probably say, well, have you tried watering it a bit more? Also, I hear fertilizer can do wonders for lawns. Have you fertilized it recently? Now, these are pretty basic solutions, right? They rest on a very rudimentary understanding of lawn care, such that if a bona fide lawn expert were to wander up, they would probably scoff at my proposals and declare that without a detailed knowledge of the type of grass we're talking about, as well as local soil conditions, shade and sunlight patterns, rodent activity, sprinkler alignment, and so much more, I should just keep my mouth shut and keep my sophomoric opinions to myself. What's interesting and also important here is that those opinions I expressed about lawns weren't based on utter ignorance. There was a little knowledge behind them. But, as the saying goes, perhaps it was just enough knowledge to be dangerous. Maybe the lawn could use some more water and fertilizer, but that doesn't change the fact that I don't know much about lawns. And that speaks to an element of sophomoric that I think I've hinted about a couple times thus far, but I want to make sure is explicit. Sophomoric statements are not necessarily wrong. Of course, in many cases they will be, but that is not the point. The point is that they reflect shallow, unsophisticated thinking, and perhaps overconfident thinking as well. Hence, sophomoric can describe observations that might be totally correct, but they're also pretty clearly just the first thing that any man on the street would think of, and therefore they're not insightful at all. And this illustrates something crucial about sophomoric and about knowledge in general, which is that, just like it is said that there's always a bigger fish, likewise, no matter how smart, how knowledgeable you are, there will always be someone else out there who knows even more, and can dismiss your ideas as sophomoric. I mean, certainly for this show, I worry constantly that if a genuine master of language and linguistics happened upon it, they would shake their heads sadly at my sophomoric word analysis and point out the myriad errors and oversights that surely pervade each episode. Not that I don't do my research, I really do, and I hope my definitions and explanations make sense and are basically correct, but nonetheless, everything and everyone is sophomoric to someone. It's now time to consider a couple examples of how to use sophomoric in normal conversation. And remember, it's perfect for situations where you want to flaunt your profound and nuanced knowledge of a topic in comparison to someone else's simplistic and overconfident notions. Example number 1. When Tanya misplaced her second favorite mechanical pencil and asked her sister if she had seen it around, her sister said, "No, but where did you last have it?" Tanya thought this was a very sophomoric question. Clearly, if she knew where she had last had it, then it wouldn't be lost in the first place. Example number 2. "So let me get this straight," said Ramona incredulously to her friends. "You think that setting up a lemonade stand is as simple as mixing some lemonade and putting up a stand? What a silly sophomoric approach. Go get me that whiteboard and let's talk about location, staffing, marketing, discounts, branding, merchandise, and how to get our parents to let us offer hard lemonade for the adults as well." Example number 3. While he generally enjoyed teaching philosophy, Professor Levinson did not appreciate his students' sophomoric attempts to resolve the Schrödinger's cat paradox by simply listening very closely to see if the cat was still moving around inside its box. With the examples out of the way, it is now time for another edition of Conversation Etiquette from a dozen decades ago, in which I read a selection from the book Manners, Culture, and Dress, which was sort of a how-to guide for the proper comportment of ladies and gentlemen in polite society, published in 1890. This snippet of conversation etiquette is labeled Avoid Unfamiliar Subjects. Quote, "Never talk upon subjects of which you know nothing, unless it be for the purpose of acquiring information. Many young men, for example, imagine that because they frequent exhibitions and operas, they are therefore qualified judges of art. No mistake is more egregious or universal." Unquote. Well, the ties here to sophomoric are unmistakable. Around 1890, when this book was published, there must have been a scourge of young men getting some exposure to the local art scene, fancying themselves critics, and inflicting their overconfident opinions on everyone. Clearly, this sophomoric practice was of the utmost annoyance to their listeners. The modern equivalent, I guess, would be movies, which everyone is welcome to take in, evaluate, craft some unshakable opinions about this one being better than that one, not doing justice to the book, a step down from the last reboot, what have you, at which point they can announce their sophomoric impressions to the world. However, as I've observed for other advice from Manners, Culture, and Dress, It seems to me that this is a high standard for conversation to meet. Idle opinions that employ half-remembered facts about poorly understood subjects occupy a good chunk of many conversations, and these conversations can be perfectly enjoyable nonetheless. Demanding expertise before people open their mouths would reduce many friendly gatherings just to awkward interactions in which people stare at the ground a lot and keep apologizing for not having devoted their lives to studying whatever subject is at hand. Okay, that will do it for us today. I do thank all of you for listening. And as always, if you like the show, do tell a friend, perhaps rate it on iTunes. We're always very grateful for an iTunes review. And if you don't like the show, the proper response is to simply keep your sophomoric opinions about podcasts to yourself. This has been the Word of the Day podcast. I'm Jamie Silva, and we'll see you next time.